Okay, I think we can start. Welcome everybody to another webinar. This one is on the role of peer learning networks during crises. My name is Parfait Kasongo and I am the Twendembele Communications and Learnings Coordinator. Before we start, we will go through a very short house rules. Just want to ask everybody to please remain muted at all times. Also keep your videos off. We will have a question and answer session after all our presenters have spoken. And to ask questions, you just want to put your questions in the chat box and we will get to them, or you can put up your hand and we can ask you to unmute yourself and pose your question. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and you will find it on the Twendembele website and also in the website of our partners or their YouTube channel. I will not be moderating the conversation today. Fiona Clark will be moderating the conversation. Fiona, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself, the topic, and our speakers, please. Thank you.
So my name is Fiona Clark. I'm the Social Development Advisor at the British High Commission in Pretoria. And I've been involved in the Twendembele program or its predecessor since 2014. So I'm very pleased to be facilitating this webinar today. The aim of the webinar is to discuss the role and value of peer learning networks to foster and drive positive development outcomes across Africa, but also to see how peer learning networks and approaches have been able to respond and step up during the time of the COVID-19 crisis. The main purpose on which peer learning networks are built is that social and professional capital is accrued, and through peer-based relationships allows network members to access and utilize expertise expertise and resources in a timely manner, adapting to their specific context and reality. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to an immediate and insatiable desire and need for information and evidence at our fingertips, both for the medical profession to be able to get on top of how to diagnose, treat, and respond to the virus itself, but also for policymakers to be able to make informed and quick decisions on how to prevent its spread, mitigate its impact, and speed into a recovery phase. So to help us think through some of these concepts and practices today, I'd like to quickly introduce our panel members. Can I just check that you're hearing me okay, Parfait? Yes, okay, Timothy is nodding. Okay, so the panel we have today is Mr. Neil Cole, who currently serves as the Executive Secretary of the Collaborative Africa Budget Reform Initiative, CABRI, which is an intergovernmental organization that provides a platform for peer learning and exchange for approximately 30 African ministries of finance and planning. CABRI's work covers fiscal and budget policy, budget transparency and accountability, and public debt management. Our second speaker will be Mr. Timothy Lubanga, who is the Commissioner for Monitoring and Evaluation in the Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda. He is a member of the Management Committee of Twendembele, which is a peer learning program by African governments using M&E to improve performance, transparency, and accountability. Mr. Michael Sampson will be our third speaker, and he is the Research Director of the Global Economic Policy Research Institute based in Cape Town. EPRI is a non-profit committed to pro-poor, equitable, and inclusive economic growth and social protection for vulnerable people as a developmental response to poverty. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Neil for our first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and good day to everyone. Let me just say that it's an honor to be sharing this platform with Twendembele, EPRI, and also the government of Uganda, and also, I suppose, a word to the sponsors, the UK Aid. So as Parfait has said, and Fiona has said, I am the Executive Secretary of the Collaborative Africa Budget Reform Initiative. And just to provide some context and why we have been able to respond to not only the COVID crisis, but also to previous extraordinary shocks that the African continent in particular has faced. Let me start by taking you through just a timeline, which I think sets the context of CABRI's formation, which really starts in 2004. And at the time, I was working in the budget office as the head of expenditure planning. And we were receiving these requests that were coming in from several other African countries, in particular from the budget managers, the budget directors, that were interested in learning more and sharing the experiences of South Africa, in particular with regard to the implementation of new reforms, such as program-based budgeting, medium-term expenditure frameworks, budget classification, etc. So that 2004 to 2009 period was really about establishing the interest and getting a network together on a very informal basis. We used to run this annual seminars, which is essentially one meeting a year. We also had our own jobs putting together the budgets of our respective countries. So it was very informal. And then in 2009, we decided to start to think about and invest in what kind of legal entity is it that we'd like to establish? Is there sufficient interest for that? And how would we ensure that we're going to be sustainable in whatever is established? And then also dealing with some of the other bureaucratic, multilateral bureaucratic bits of what kind of organization we want to start. In 2013 was when we moved CABRI out of the National Treasury of South Africa to become a fully fledged independent organization, and negotiated a host country agreement with South Africa, etc. But it was about, so what is CABRI's niche, right? What is our comparative advantage? How are we going to be different to the kind of technical assistance that is provided by the World Bank and IMF also, and also other bilateral and multilateral programs? How do we use that comparative advantage of being a regional network where peers are given the opportunity to come together and to share their experience, share their learning, and be able to take back into their own institutions those various learnings, right? So what was that niche that we were working on? In 2017 was really about deepening what we almost used as a slogan, and that was what works when and how. And I suppose what we were framing our work on was that because we all came from ministries of finance and we were working with senior budget managers, that we had a good sense of what the problems were that we were facing in our administrations, what would work as reforms, and is there a timing with the implementation of those reforms, and how would those reforms be implemented, which would be in a somewhat different manner. We also in 2017 adopted what is called the PDIA approach, so problem-driven iterative adaptation, and it's an approach that was developed at the Kennedy School, and I'll speak a bit more about that later. So 2017 was about deepening our understanding of this approach that we wanted to apply in the work with senior budget officials. 2021 moving forward, and I mean, we also busy finalizing our strategic plan going forward, is really about refining our instruments and adapting to this changing environment. The focus areas, just in terms of instruments, will be a research capacity that we want to strengthen, build on our policy dialogues, and also capability assessments. So I thought to just give an indication of where we work. So all across the African continent, West Africa is certainly where most of our work is concentrated. And this is just in terms of the country engagements that we have with countries in West Africa, Central, North Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. And if I was to just take 3 years, looking back, West African countries have been where we have worked the most, as well as Southern Africa and East Africa, with some drop in Central Africa. The country that we work quite extensively in Central Africa is the Central African Republic, and then also to an extent with Cameroon, and from time to time with the DRC. If we can just go to the previous slide quickly. So, I mean, just to reflect on what pre-COVID looked like in terms of our work, lots of engagements with teams from ministries of finance and from different African countries, to taking, for all of 2020, taking our entire work plan onto an online platform. And the picture there just shows the most recent one, which was on COVID-19 finance, vaccine financing, procurement and distribution. Next slide. Okay, I mean, these are the two instruments that we essentially use in peer learning. And the first is the policy dialogues, which is shown on the left. And the policy dialogues is more of a response to the needs that countries have shared with us in terms of their policy priorities, and then supplying an opportunity for a strategic discussion to take place around those policy priorities. And that we call the policy dialogues, and that is where we bring to the policy dialogue finance officials, as well as what is called the line ministry or the spending department officials. And we normally focus on a policy priority. The ones that we've covered so far is the extractive sector, agriculture, wash, water, sanitation and hygiene, health, financing, and now since 2020, in particular on COVID financing, climate change, and it's essentially where at least 2 to 3 officials per country would come to a policy dialogue, and we would prepare country case studies for that dialogue to take place. And we don't go beyond about 15 countries, so that the policy dialogue and the opportunity for the dialogue is maximized. The second instrument that we use is in our Building Public Finance Capabilities program that uses this PDIA approach. So it's problem-driven iterative adaptation, which essentially it's about identifying or getting country teams to identify a local problem that they are facing within their administration. It's all in country. EPRI provides a coach to the team. And we think it's a really good form of peer learning in the sense that it is peer learning within the country, in that the team if it's made up of officials from a Ministry of Finance, there's a great deal of learning within the team. But a large part of the work that the team undertakes is about getting acceptance for the actions that they want to embark on. And that acceptance they gain from officials in other divisions within the ministry or across their governments. So we felt that EPRI was well suited to respond to the budgetary and financing issues that arose from COVID-19 and lockdowns, using these two instruments, in particular, the policy dialogues instrument. Thank you. Excuse me. We also had laid a basis for our response to what we were now seeing as an extraordinary shock, right? And Africa has faced these extraordinary shocks before. There was the Ebola crisis where Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia needed to undertake many of the actions that now was being taken globally in response to COVID, right? In terms of adjustments to their budget as a result of the impact that the economic slowdown had, the coordination on an almost daily basis between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance, right? And many of those examples were seen in the way that countries responded to the Ebola crisis. In 2017, we brought about 30 African countries together to a conference where we were going to focus on how do countries manage budgetary pressures, and in particular, extraordinary budgetary pressures. It was held in Ouagadougou, and as I said, a lot of the lessons from that conference we could apply now to the COVID crisis. We looked at not only a health crisis, i.e. Ebola, we also looked at a extraordinary drop in fuel prices and the way that it affected Nigeria. We looked at social demands and the extraordinary pressure that had placed on South Africa with the no-fee demands, the drop in SACU revenues and how that impacted on the Lesotho. And then also in Burkina Faso, we looked at the wage demands and the impact that was having on the budget. So that formed a nice basis to start thinking about how we were going to respond to COVID. So very early on in the crisis, in April 2020, we had our first webinar on managing budgetary pressures from COVID-19 in Africa. And this was really an opportunity for countries, and we mixed it across different size economies. So we had South Africa, Nigeria, it was Ghana, and then EPRI also provided a presentation on how sort of a month into lockdown, countries were experiencing the economic impact in particular, and how they were responding with the budget in terms of the reprioritization of funding towards health and the introduction of new social grants to respond to a rise in unemployment, etc. Then we started getting into looking at now how countries were applying different practices or improving on certain practices with regard to strategic purchasing in health, and also how they were mobilizing resources in order to respond to the pandemic. As a result of the crisis, we were also seeing debt increasing to levels that were, even in South Africa, to levels that were now touching on levels of unsustainability. The most recent activity, as I mentioned right at the beginning, was a policy dialogue, online policy dialogue on COVID vaccine financing, procurement, and distribution. And going forward, that will be a particular focus of EPRI, because it is an area that most countries are going to need to be tackling when one looks at, the low rates of immunization against COVID, and also the fact that what we are seeing in country budgets is an inadequate provision for the financing of vaccines. And then we've also participated in some joint activities with the Overseas Development Institute, the OECD, and then also with sustaining the Sun movement that focuses on nutrition. Move on.
Sorry,
so just the last, so this is my last slide. Sorry, Fiona.
Okay,
so this
you.
is
no problem.
Okay, so this is just if you visit our website, we have a public finance, a COVID public finance response monitor. And the response monitor provides some very useful statistics on how countries have responded to the COVID crisis. There's latest cases, fatalities, infections, etc. But also, more importantly, there's information on health financing, the kind of funding space that countries have, the adjustments that they've undertaken in their budgets in response to the crisis. And then we've just recently established a page that now starts to explore how countries are financing vaccines, how they're procuring that, and also some important lessons with the distribution of vaccines. So thank you very much. And sorry if I went over time. Thank you.
Oh, perfect timing. Just wasn't sure how many slides you had left. That's perfect. Thank you very much. I will quickly hand over then directly to Timothy, please, to give his intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, and all colleague panelists, and all the participants in this exciting webinar. I bring you warm greetings from Uganda, and I look forward this afternoon to sharing with you the experience of Twende Mbele, which is one of the vibrant and growing networks in the Africa region, with the hope that we can benefit from learning from you, but also sharing with you how we have managed to deal with the COVID pandemic and other crises. So my presentation will be a quick sharing on 4 areas, including the government context, some issues around communication and problem solving, and then how was the experience in terms of compliance vis-a-vis the learning required from the evidence we get through M&E, and then flexibility on priorities. So very briefly, in terms of the context, as has already been highlighted, Twende Mbele is really a voluntary peer learning partnership of African governments and regional organizations interested in using monitoring and evaluation to strengthen government performance and accountability. We came into existence in 2012, and collaboration is really done through the monitoring and evaluation government departments in the countries of Benin, Ghana, Kenya, Niger, South Africa, and Uganda, with clear Anglophone based at Wits University hosting our office and being part of the management group, as well as the African Development Bank. So we also collaborate with more African countries beyond that membership, and we hope that we can expand in that collaboration around peer learning for the improvement of our systems going forward. We've been partnering and supported by the FCDO, previously DFID, the Hewlett Foundation, and a lot of in-kind contribution from partner countries. So the collaboration is largely around sharing experiences and collaborating in developing and also implementing M&E systems that improve performance and impact on the citizens of the partner countries. So in summary, our outputs are around creating demand within the government M&E systems, sharing M&E experiences and knowledge, learning and capacity development, collaborative development, country ownership, and collaborative governance. So in terms of the country context, again, and also in relation to the theme of today's discussion, actually Twende Mbele has been facing a number of crises or shocks. And for us, the most common shock arises from changes of governments. because this is a partnership where government departments are the members. We face a lot of risks around restructuring of government departments when political leadership changes across the member countries. Sometimes ministers are changed, or champions that championing the M&D agenda in those departments, or movement of staff. Sometimes actually departments are merged, and that is a big risk for us that we have been facing and probably will continue to face. However, we have gained and realized a lot of benefit around the importance of both formal and informal channels of communication and learning that we build, especially in terms of helping us deal with these shocks. And so the very bureaucratic nature of government departments has enabled the storage of institutional memory, which helps us to deal with these shocks as and when they happen. With respect to COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic particularly, first and foremost, the pandemic found the Twendembele network already deploying a lot of virtual engagements punctuated by a few physical meetings in the way we conduct business. So in terms of its introducing of new methods of work, the Twendembele partnership somehow benefited from a quick ability to adjust to the new mechanism of conducting business virtually, because we were already largely operating that way. And so, for example, we were able to undertake a comprehensive review of Twendembele activities across the network, but also in the partner countries. And this was a very successful review, of course, faced with a number of challenges, but we concluded it quite well. But we also managed to implement a number of key activities that we had targeted, including, for example, the introduction of rapid evaluations as a concept in a number of countries. South Africa was already advanced on rapid evaluations, but in Benin, in Uganda, and a few other countries, we're able to train a pool of evaluators and stakeholders and actually start undertaking rapid evaluations. We were also able to do some very good work around intensifying the involvement of civil society organizations in the national evaluation agendas and on gender mainstreaming or national evaluations, just to mention a few examples. So I think by the very nature and fact that we were already doing business that way, we were able to quite adopt quickly. However, that has not been, there are no challenges. There are many challenges. Next slide. So if we look at communication and problem solving, in partner countries, the pandemic interrupted without doubt the normal bureaucratic processes a lot. And so decisions had to be taken quickly, and that also affected the way the networks were performing. So mechanisms for consensus building and the new emergency coordination structures had to be created with mandates for making decisions quickly. And in that way, we, to a large extent, was compromising the use of evidence and the learning that we would have loved to take place in decision making. Also at the network level, a number of targeted program objectives were met with a lot of difficulty, or probably not fully met. For example, we commissioned studies, but there was very slow response to questionnaires. People were in lockdowns, were slow to respond to their emails, to participate in Skype discussions. The culture of Zoom was just cropping in. And so there were quite a number of challenges in that area. Virtual meetings, of course, with all the challenges we face in holding virtual meetings, limited engagement, particularly with the new and the collaborating countries, that's beyond the 6 countries, became extremely difficult. And then challenges with arranging activities like training, which require long hours of physical engagements. Next slide. So in this slide, very quickly, I just want to share how we were very heavy, both in the country, but also within the network, but mostly in the partner countries, very heavy on compliance. So everything was quick. And so reduced compliance due to change in priorities. So priorities, most governments, the Ministry of Finance issued guidelines which required prioritizing and focusing on very few COVID-related activities. So there was reduced compliance to the broader performance assessments across the whole government. Data quality and data gaps increased. Coordination definitely became a huge challenge, as in our case, we had to have political level activities as well as technical level activities. And those were very, very big challenges. So there was less focus on scope for reflection and learning during national emergency responses, and more on just do this within these few priority areas. Also, reduced underlearning were difficulties in following up on the use of evidence, on whether decisions are informed by earlier recommendations. However, as we see, we come to the second year of this COVID period, we are now seeing increased demand for evidence to inform planning in the future. And this is basically after realizing some of the mistakes that we probably made before, and increased the desire to bring into play the private sector, the civil society, voluntary organizations, and all stakeholders, the academia, to inform planning and so on. Next slide. So as I conclude, just a few reflections around flexibility in priorities and in prioritizing. One is we really are happy to share the value of formal and informal personal relationships, which we realize within the Twendembele network. The participants or the representatives of the governments have developed a very important formal, but also very informal personal bond. And this indirectly enhances learning and a lot of trust building, a lot of experience, sharing of experiences, and the realization of unintended benefits.
But I'm afraid we're running out of time. So I think whilst we wait for Timothy to come up, we're just going to have to move over to Michael. Michael, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Fiona. And thank you for the opportunity to share EPRI's experience with you. The next slide here gives an overview of what I'll talk about in the next 8 minutes, how EPRI's experience and our capacity building model centers around peer learning and how the crisis has changed this. The next slide just highlights EPRI's long experience, almost 3 decades, going back to the training we did for the National Parliament in Cape Town in the 1990s, and now provides courses globally in social protection our work has really focused on peer learning because at the time we were offering these courses in social protection, there really were not global experts. We really relied on the participants we brought together in our courses to share expertise. And we had almost no experience in e-learning. But then came COVID, and it's a massive uncertainty shock. And it's doing two things. It's really accelerating the demand for timely and relevant knowledge, but there are fewer experts than ever because this uncertainty and the nature of this shock has changed things so much. And this has really caused important evolution in our peer learning model. We immediately went to online training, and the next slide illustrates one of our major programs that really shifted our approach to peer learning. The Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency's, that SIDA International Training Program that we had started just the year before. And this program focuses not on the training, not the typical courses we did where on the Friday of the second week you get handed a certificate and you go home. This was a 5-year training involving action-oriented work, collaborating in country, and it involved a real shift from training to action. We're working in Uganda, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in 7 other countries across Africa and Asia. And there was a real need to find experts from countries in government to participate in this training and really learn. And this peer learning is at the heart now of everything we do. It helps us to organize collective knowledge and channel it into change programs that are country owned. The next slide highlights one of the changes that the pandemic has inspired. We're all online, we're all connected via Zoom, but it's a very fragmenting experience. It's really hard to share informal knowledge. It's hard to communicate outside of a Zoom session. And so we enlisted the support of what we call peer facilitators, country experts in each of our countries that could help bring together teams, the teams that are working in each country. And so it's really a shift from sharing personal experience to actually building at a node level, at a country level, country evidence, and then over time, harnessing that into a cross-country learning model. The next slide here highlights some of the key lessons from that. Our international training program is multi-sectoral. So we need experts in government, from education, from social development, from health, from the livelihoods ministries to work together in a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder way. And that involves a lot of learning and a lot of knowledge. And one of our approaches, and I think this is like EPRI with their problem-driven iterative approach, we focus on learning by doing. And learning by doing approaches require harnessing that knowledge from the local context. And this pandemic has really pushed us to move more from a training model to a collaborative work model. It also logistically changed the nature of our training. So instead of bringing people together intensively for a week, we would try to achieve the same kind of results over a 3-week period. So instead of 8 hours a day, training might only be 3 hours a day. This slide 6 here highlights our global course, which is available for anyone interested in working in social protection. Like all of our peer learning activities, it focuses on teamwork. It relies heavily on discussion sessions and encourages cross-country learning. Because it's remote, it's very easy for us to connect our team in Ethiopia with our team in Tanzania and have them share their experiences with global experts. And social distancing has made it better for us to operate a rolling admissions model, so people have a greater opportunity to interact with a diverse group of peers. This next slide, slide 7, just kind of illustrates the key things we want out of peer learning. First, and I think the real value of peer learning is you get to harness such diverse ideas, and you need new knowledge in a crisis because of all the uncertainty, and getting these new ideas from peers that are involved in handling a crisis is very valuable. The peer learning model also enhances collaboration, and it's just the best way to communicate because people listen to each other. After 45 minutes of a webinar, you know, how easy is it to pay attention? But when you're discussing with fellow colleagues who are involved in the same process, the communication is much more succinct. My last slide just highlights a few key lessons. And you're welcome to look at our course on our website, which I've listed here, epri.org.za. The online portal is free and available to anyone who's interested. And I want to just end with 5 key lessons we've learned for promoting peer learning. One, a course has to be responsive to the individual's learning requirements. And moving online has actually made one-on-one engagement easier. In our in-person courses, yeah, we'd meet with teams and we'd have big sessions, but there were many participants we never had an individual conversation with. The second thing is the importance of going beyond the standard lecture and discussion and Q&A. That actually works pretty well in person, but it flounders online, and you really need to get into the games and other interactions that make online learning so much more challenging. And part of that scheduling, we tried that standard 8-hour-a-day Zoom call. That doesn't work. Maybe 3 hours a day maximum. But you can then leverage e-learning portals like the one you see at the top of the page to provide a wealth of resources, and through one-on-one engagement, provide individualized learning plans for each participant and take advantage of online capacities. There are actually some things that are better online than in person. Certain kinds of activities work more effectively when the participant is in front of a screen. And if you build those kinds of resources into your training and capacity building, you bring a whole nother dimension to peer learning. But with all those lessons, I want to highlight everyone I know is ready to return to in-person training. But it's going to be different. We've learned a lot, and I think the training approach of the model of the future is really going to be a hybrid approach, taking the best from both. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michael, and also to Timothy and Neil for those presentations. I'm sorry for any technical glitches that we had in the meantime. I'm sure the presentations will also be shared with participants after the meeting, and as Parfait says, it will all be loaded on the website so people can go back over them. Cara, can I just hand over to you quickly to round up any questions that have come up in the text box? And then if people have specific questions they wish to ask, please do put your hands up and I will call on you to ask those.
Sure, thanks, Fiona. So I guess quite a few people had a question around sort of what Michael was ending with, which is how you can sustain participation And what are some of the, I guess, most effective online engagement tools that people are using? So Neil, I mean, you were talking about policy dialogues. I guess how have some of those tools adapted to the online environment? And then Timothy, if you want to, and Michael, of course, if you want to respond as well.
Thank you. I'm happy to come in now. So yeah, I mean, thanks for the great presentations, and also Michael, I've just learned so much about your experience and how that transition to an online platform has worked, and some of the lessons from that. You make a very valid point about everyone is just about ready now to have in-person meetings, workshops, training, and certainly the same for our policy dialogues. I mean, we've pretty zoned out of webinars now, and are looking at, and I've tried different online software that brings about more of that in-person feel, where we are breaking up into smaller groups that are on the online platform, where there is not a vague interest in the subject, but a very direct interest in that the person is able to bring a policy challenge to the discussion, and where the person is in a position in their own administration where they can take that lesson into their own policy discussions and implementation. I mean, we've been using, especially for our building public finance capabilities program, we've been using breakaway groups, whiteboards on the Zoom platform, but also using an application called Ziteboard, and that is something that can be shared, because in our building PF capabilities program, we use the Ishikawa diagram, or fishbone, or problem tree, as some would call it, to deconstruct problems, and that's quite useful to have somebody actually then drawing the Ishikawa diagram and noting the causes of and sub causes of the problem. I think what maybe that's the last point, what helped us with the Building PF Capabilities program is that it's a program that runs over 8 months. It starts with an online course, and that was always built into the program. So we were able to load Canvas onto our online platform, or link it to the online platform. The engagement between the coach and the country team has been through WhatsApp or just normal calls to the team on a regular basis. A lot of that has been taken onto Zoom and MS Teams. The visits by the coaches to the teams in country has not been possible, but country teams have been able to meet either in their office boardrooms or in hotel conference rooms, where teams have been able to meet to plan what their next actions are going to be. And then the progress reviews, where we normally brought teams together, that we've had to do online, and it has impacted on bringing 8 country teams together, where there's an opportunity for them to really get into the progress that they've made. We've done that online. It's achieved its purpose, but I think is limited in terms of just building up that relationship that can contribute towards more longer term peer alliances being developed between different country teams. But I think going forward, there's certainly lessons, and as Michael has said, and I certainly agree that, you know, going forward, future work, future way in which we conduct peer learning is probably going to be a combination of in-person and online. And I think in particular for Africa, you know, when there's so many airlines that have folded, traveling in Africa post-COVID is going to be a nightmare, I mean, for many of us. And we may just be forced to operate on an online platform. It's not going to be a case of, you know, jumping on a train in Cologne and, you know, in 2 hours' time, you're in a different European city. For us in Africa, it's going to be, you know, 24 hours later, or even the next day that you're going to be arriving in your destination. So we need to think very carefully about how we use online platforms. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Just because of time, Timothy, there was another question here around, oh, I think Timothy just dropped off. Okay, let me open it up to Michael and Neil again. There was another question here about, you know, given some of the challenges that you've described, what might you do differently if, well, okay, when the next crisis occurs?
Great. I was just typing an answer to that on the chat. I would start doing things differently now. And I think the shift to a hybrid approach will make us much more responsive to future crises. Well, first of all, a shift to a hybrid approach might preempt some future crises. If people can travel less and have a carbon-friendlier footprint, then maybe climate change will not create such a serious next crisis. But probably the train has left the station. That's already in the works. But if we build hybrid models now that we can then shift emphasis in the face of a crisis, we'll be much more ready to respond to the next crisis.
Timothy, sorry, I can see you've actually got your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yes. Yes, I can't put my video back on, but I can respond. I would like to respond to the question on participation. And so within Twendembele, the way we handle how to increase participation is by doing division of labor. So what we do is we come together and review our annual work plan, and then we decide democratically, of course, which country leads on what activity. So, for example, on the development of rapid evaluations, which is a practice we are which is a practice we are rolling out in the different countries, we assign that task to one country. On mainstreaming gender, we assign another country to lead on the participation of the civil society, we assign another country. On development of new management performance assessment systems. So in that way, we have each country obliged to report on what they are leading on, but also taking the initiative to drive the participation of the other countries. And I think that has worked very well for us. It has ensured that there is interest and active participation of all the member countries. The second issue I want to respond to, I think there was a question in the chat around the risks. What would you do differently? I think this pandemic has demonstrated the importance of paying a lot more attention within the network to anticipating the risks, but also discussing how you would mitigate those risks. And again, in our Twendembele experience, we have, of course, other shocks, as I in the presentation. And I think thinking around how to address those risks so that we are better prepared is always helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we're out of time, so throwing it back to you, Fiona, to wrap us up.
Thank you very much, Cara, and thank you very much to our speakers and also to the questions. There's some great examples also in the chat box if people quickly want to review those before we close the call. But I just wanted to thank everybody very much for their participation on yet another Zoom call, and also to our presenters for sharing their experiences. Clearly, we could have had a whole day on this topic and still not exhausted all the ideas that are available in this virtual room. I liked, Michael, your last line, which said COVID changed learning forever. I think COVID changed everything forever. And, you know, it's a new reality that we're facing now. But let's hope that we can both harness the good things that COVID has driven in terms of innovation and driving that proximity of bringing people into these virtual spaces where they maybe before wouldn't have participated, but not lose out either on the you know, valid opportunities that are provided by face-to-face engagement and you know, people-to-people engagement, which is so important. So the other, I think, big learning point for me from COVID is that now it's finally driven also the recognition of the importance of evidence for evidence-based policy making and decision making, and hopefully we can maintain that momentum and really drive the learning and evaluation agenda through the programs that we continue to implement in our respective professional and personal lives. So with that, I would just like to thank everyone. Thank you to Twende and Cara and Parfait for setting this up. And I wish you all a very nice afternoon and weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And goodbye.
You. Goodbye.
Great. Take care now.
Thanks very much.